Reverse by Black K. Cat. Chapter 46. Tergiversant. So, Kushina says, trying to keep her voice bright and cheerful, even when what she really wants to do is swear. I have a good idea that probably won't work, or a bad idea that most likely will. From where he's leaning against the wall in the far corner of his cell, ostensibly watching the door. But really, Kushina was friends with Uchiha Mikoto. She knows brooding when she sees it. Sakamo glances over at her, brows furrowing just a little bit, even as he cracks a F-smile. You know, I'm beginning to see the downsides of letting an Uzumaki make the plans, he jokes. Kushina pulls a face at him, huffing and crossing her arms over her chest. I'd like to see you come up with something better, she protests. We're a little late on options here, you know. Sakamo raises his hand, surrendering the point, but his eyes are still dark, untouched by the humor in his face. Kushina watches him through her lashes as she pretends to concentrate on the seal again, but she doesn't quite know what to say. As soon as I'm out of the cell, I'm going to punch you from what you did to Kakashi, is a little more warning than she wants to provide a veteran shinobi. She'll be able to land a hit either way, but she doesn't want Sakamo to see it coming. Better for her temper, because she doesn't have the luxury of losing it right now. Stifling a sigh, she leans back against the stone behind her and closes her eyes, trying not to feel the lingering phantom ache all over her body. All her imagination, she knows. It doesn't respond to movement, and she seems to be healing almost as fast as she did when she was a Jinchuriki. If it were real, the pain would be gone. If it were gone, maybe the tearing ache that's curled around her heart would be easier to bear. She doesn't know how long it's been since she died, and there's a vague sense of something in between then and now, even if she can't recall it clearly. But it feels too immediate, too close. Her husband is dead, life sacrificed to seal her burden into her son. The Kyuubi she was supposed to contain tore through Kanaa and probably killed hundreds. Her child, her son, the baby she was so deliriously excited to bring into the world, was taken before she even got to hold him, used as a pawn in some fight she didn't even know was brewing. There was only one brief second where she got to hold him right before she died, and it was amazing. He was so beautiful. Taking a shaky breath, Kushina curls a hand over her heart and wonders how old Naruto is now. His hair looked blonde in that moment she could see him. As blonde as Minato's, and the thought makes her smile, though it comes with its own dose of grief. Minato hadn't survived sealing the Kyuubi, even splitting its power between himself and Naruto. So, did her son grow up alone? Did Mikoto take him in? Did Yoshino or Inoichi or even Hiruzen? She hopes so. Hopes with all her heart that Naruto never ever had to face the pain of being a Jinchuriki with the world against him. Kushina knows the feeling of that all too well and has never wanted anything that painful for her son. Minato wanted the village to see Naruto as a hero, and Kushina smiles, sadly shaking her head a little. Such an air-headed, optimistic, pretty boy. She doesn't know how he ever got anything done walking around with his head in the clouds like that. Maybe Minato was right, and Naruto is a hero to Konoha. But Kushina doesn't think so. People don't see Jinchuriki as heroes, they see them as the monsters inside of them. Kushina took up the burden from Mito, and people were wary. But the Kyuubi had never escaped, never harmed anyone in Konoha. Only Hashirama when he fought it, and he lasted long enough for Mito to seal it within herself. After an attack like the Masked Man started with no way to tell people that the Kyuubi wasn't acting entirely on its own, there's little chance that Naruto didn't take at least part of the blame. This bad idea, Sakamo says, making her open her eyes and look over at him. He's frowning at the doorway, eyes narrowed, and it makes her remember that the White Fang used to outshine even the Sannin where fame and reputation were concerned. You said it would probably work. Most likely, Kushina corrects, a little miffed because she'd hardly risk both their lives on a probably. Well, usually. Unless it was a really exciting plan. That earns her a fledge of a smile, gone in a moment as Sakamo looks away again. I'll take most likely then, he says, faintly wry. What do you need me to do? Nothing yet, Kushina answers him cheerfully. I'm going to drop a seal. Do you think you can copy it on yourself if you see it on me? Sakamoto nods because that's a basic shinobi skill and glances at the door again. Orochimaru has left them alone for almost 6 hours straight without even a summons to watch them, and Kushina is a little worried about what it means. Orochimaru isn't quite their enemy right now, even if he's creepy. What if whoever he's working for figured out that he was dropping hints to them and killed him? Their plans might change, and then Kushina will really have to scramble for a solution. Was there another? Sakamoto asks suddenly, and this time he's very definitely not looking at her. After all, was there another war? Kushina stares at his profile for a moment, the tense line of his jaw, the tightness around his eyes. There's always another war, she says, not unkindly. We're shinobi. Sometimes I think that fighting is all we know how to do. Sakamoto tries for another smile, but this time it comes out wan, hard to see, with his face set into lines of tired grief. Kakashi? He asks, barely a whisper. The sharpness of a biting retort is on Kushina's tongue, a rant about committing suicide and leaving your 8-year-old son to find your body. But she reins it in. Too sharp for right now, faced with the unsteadiness in Sakamoto's voice, the curled-in posture. Kushina isn't that cruel. He was 14 when I died, Kushina says, and lets herself smile a little. Maybe it's a touch melancholy, but the fact that Kakashi was even vaguely steady and functional after everything that happened to him was always something she thought of as a miracle, and she loved the brat. Loves him if he's still alive, and she's sure he is. Kakashi is a survivor no matter what life throws at him, even if it's sometimes despite himself. He was one of the best shinobi in the village, and an insufferable little rat. Sakamoto chuckles like it's being pulled up from somewhere deep inside of him, rough but sincere. Like his mother, he says, and this time his smile reaches his eyes. All the various weapons that she carried, and her tongue was always the sharpest one. Kushina's not about to mention Kakashi's newer habits, showing up everywhere an hour late with the worst excuses. Even Obito would have been ashamed to use some of them, honestly. If she does, she'll have to explain their source, and she doesn't think she can do it in any way that won't make Sakamoto feel even worse. She needs him at his best for their escape, after all. We'll see them, she says instead, looking down at where her fingers have curled into fists. You'll see Kakashi, and I'll see Naruto. I'm sure they've grown up so much. Maybe Naruto looks like Minato, she thinks, unable to help it. Minato was so handsome. Of course she wants her son to look like him. She loves him regardless, though. Loves him more than she can even begin to contemplate. Naruto? Sakamoto asks, still smiling as he watches her. Yeah! Kushina laughs, curling her arms around herself. She's happy just imagining getting to hold Naruto again, this time without death hanging over them. He's... the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, a low voice says, making them both twist around. Orochimaru glides into the room, carrying 2 trays balanced on his arm, and shuts the door behind him. His eyes flicker from Kushina to Sakamoto, linger for a moment, and then slide back. An outcast orphan Konoha can't even manage to keep track of. Dread creeps into Kushina's chest with a sensation like her blood has suddenly turned to lead, weighing at her, dragging her down. She freezes, eyes fixed on the scientist, and tries to remind herself to breathe. What? Sakamoto asks for her, and that's enough to jar Kushina into motion. She's on her feet in an instant, reaching automatically for the bars, even though she knows it will only hurt her. But Orochimaru is already turning away to look at Sakamoto. Surely you of all people can understand Konoha's black heart, Hata. Surely you of all people can understand Konoha's black heart, Hatake. Orochimaru says, coldly sly, and if Kushina wasn't looking, she might miss the faint pull of his jaw, the way his mouth tightens. Even useful monsters only have so long a shelf life. Naruto is not a monster! Kushina cries, fury out like acid in her throat. She slams her hand against the barrier, automatically doubling down on the Kyuubi's chains because he always tries to take advantage of her anger. But there's only an empty space where the Biju is supposed to be. Only an empty space because the Kyuubi is in her son! Sealed away, but still the cause of so much grief. She regrets sharply and fiercely, if only just for a moment, that Minato didn't listen to her at the end, seal the QB back into her, and let them both die. Naruto wouldn't be a Jinchuriki then. Naruto wouldn't be an orphan. He'd have a father at the very least, and no reason for the people of Konoha to hate him. Everyone Konoha can't control the monster, Orochimaru says flatly, turning on her, and there's a rage too much her own deeply buried in his eyes. 4 long stalking steps across the floor, and he's right up before the bars, golden eyes holding hers without blinking, without wavering. Kushina takes a breath, but she's not scared of him. She lived a lifetime with a monster in her soul, and she's not scared of anything. How did you leave, Orochimaru? She demands. Why'd they chase you out? His eyes narrow, features twisting in something that could be disgust or disdain. Maybe regret, Kushina thinks, and wonders if she's fooling herself. Because I followed the wrong orders. He spits as venomous as a cobra. Kushina isn't stupid. That's hardly the full story. And, she prods, aiming for sore points without mercy. She's a Kunoichi after all. Did they yank the Hokage's hat right out from your hands this time? Did you insult the wrong person? Did people say mean things about you and push you out? I killed children. The shout takes her aback, and just for a moment Kushina can't find the words she needs to answer that. Orochimaru glares at her, face full of a rising fury, almost inhuman in the grip of his anger, but just for a moment she can see in his features the grim, solemn man who would walk through the graveyard once a week, pausing before 3 different sets of graves. Orochimaru laughs at the look on her face, but takes a step back, spinning to pace the line between her cell and Sakamo's. I killed children, he says again, and all Kushina can see is the back of his head, but there's an undercurrent in his voice she can't quite pick out. Tell me, Uzumaki, Hatake, what would you do given those orders? Given orders that you know will cause deaths. Orphans, abandoned children, all lined up like sacrifices with a hand on your back pushing you forward. Good can come of it, a way to save every life that's at risk, and it's nothing you haven't done before with prisoners and captured shinobi. These ones you simply don't ask where they come from. Horror twists in Kushina's gut, but she forces herself to breathe through it. Across from her, Sakamo is doing better, his expression set and unwavering. If a shinobi, he says, carefully even, we target those from our own village, the sacrifices of our comrades become meaningless. Doing something like that, Orochimaru snorts, turning on his heel to face Kushina again. Spare me the sermon, Hatake, he says dismissively. Sarutobi Hiruzen was my Jonin sensei. I assure you I've heard every last one your little mind can dream up, but I still remain unconvinced. In the eyes of chemistry, biology, physics, we are all the same. One life has no more worth than any other, just sentimental attachment created by those who cling too tightly. With deliberate grace, he sets one tray on the ground and slides it beneath the bars on Kushina's cell, then steps away. Before he can pass Sakamo his food, though, Sakamo says quietly, "And who are you gonna get to, then?" Orochimaru's hands go white-knuckled on the tray. "I beg your pardon," he says icily, and it's certainly not framed as a question. But Kushina's taken the leap as well. Sakamo's words, enough of a bridge to follow the logic. "We're a test," she challenges, and even when Orochimaru's dark look snaps back in her direction, she just grins at him, all teeth. "You're using us to make sure everything works, and when we get out, you're going to use it as an excuse to bring someone else back to life." Judging by the faintly surprised glance Sakamo flicks her, he hadn't drawn the conclusions not quite so far, but Kushina is confident that that's what this is all about. Is the only thing that makes sense, after all. Orochimaru's eyes dart towards the door as if double-checking that they're alone, and then he lifts his chin, draws his spine up straight, and turns sharply to face her. "It has no bearing on you, Uzumaki," he says coldly. "Play your part and you'll be reunited with your son and brother. My plots have nothing to do with yours." "Brother?" Kushina blinks at him, suddenly very confused. "I don't have a brother, you know. Orochimaru dismisses that with a flick of one hand. He never introduced himself to you, but Uzumaki Kurama claims he shares blood with you nevertheless. Or half of it, at the very least. You might wait before you deny him. The thought that he is actually Naruto's uncle is one of the only things keeping the hidden villages from locking him away forever, given what he's done. Something big, it sounds like. Kushina thinks a little wryly, and if there was ever a sign of an Uzumaki, tell me! She demands, heedless of the sparks that leap at her when her fist slams into the barrier. If he's my brother, tell me! Before Orochimaru can so much as open his mouth, though, there's a light rap on the door, a pause, and then the click of a lock turning. Orochimaru turns in a swirl of long black hair and black robes, pausing only to shove the tray roughly into Sakamo's cell. As he sweeps for the door, it opens, and a blue-skinned man with vaguely shark-like features leans in. Little wants to speak with you, he tells Orochimaru cheerfully, then yelps and hops back a few steps as Orochimaru sails past him, looking ready to mow down anyone in his way. The shark man huffs after him, sounding offended, but still wanders into the room, his steps deliberately lazy. Kushina glances at the black cloak with red clouds, clearly some kind of uniform, and then up at Sakamo, who looks calm but faintly wary. He holds her gaze for half a second, one hand twitching faintly behind the stranger's back. The Anbu sign for enemy nin, and in this context it's easy enough to understand. How are you? She asks, sinking back to the ground and pulling her meal closer. She fiddles with it, rearranging the wooden bowls, but doesn't start eating as she keeps one wary eye on the man. Oshigaki Kasame, he answers, still unflinchingly cheerful, but his eyes are on the papers scattered across the table. He sifts through them idly, but the expression on his face isn't one of a man trying to keep his hands busy. He's looking for something. Formerly of Kiri. No need to introduce yourselves. Everyone knows the red hot habanero and the white fang. Or used to know you, I guess it is now. He laughs like it's a fantastic joke, and when he looks up at Kushina, he's grinning, showing filed teeth. Pretty impressive what Orochimaru can come up with, isn't it? Kushina's eyes linger on the slashed hitayate, and she wonders a little disbelievingly what it takes for Kiri to make someone a missing nin. Nothing good, of that she's certain. You're second in command here? She asks, remembering his words about a leader. Not him, then, but somehow she doesn't think he's just a follower. Kasame pauses, tilting his head a little, and then his grin comes back. He chuckles to himself, rubbing a hand over his hair, and says, Yeah, I guess I kind of am. As if it's a surprise to him. He sets the papers back down, precisely where they were before, with no visible sign to show they were moved, and offers a cheerful wave as he turns back to the door. Enjoy your meal. He laughs, and the door falls shut behind him, the lock sliding home with a clear snap. Taking a breath, Kushina tries to ease her shoulders out of their tension-tight posture, even as she twists her fingers in her lap. Too much to think about, even though what she needs is to focus on the seal that will get them out of here. But a brother, she thinks, still slightly off balance. I have a brother. And Orochimaru implied that Naruto is with him, so even if all of Konoha turned on Naruto, he still has someone. She closes her eyes, breathing carefully, and leans forward to rest her head on her raised knees. Brother and son. She has a brother and a son waiting for her out there, even if they don't know her. That's one more reason to push on, to go faster, try harder. Orochimaru could be lying. That's certainly a possibility, but Kushina thinks, oh, what if he isn't? Kurama is awake well before the sun, though it takes him a few good minutes to wiggle out from between Gaara and Naruto, who apparently decided that his bed was more comfortable than theirs. Once he's managed to get free without waking either of them, he rolls his eyes a little at their immediate gravitation towards each other, pulls his blanket up, and slips out of the bedroom, being careful to pick his way over the piles of Jinchuriki without disturbing them. Only Han stirs, and he simply opens one eye, grunts, and goes back to sleep. With a soft snort, because sage damn it, this is very much not what he intended when he landed here. Kurama takes one look back at all 9 Jinchuriki sprawled out on the floor of Zabuza's main room, shakes his head, and slips out. To his faint surprise, Haku is already in the kitchen when he walks in, just pulling the kettle off the heat. He offers Kurama a tentative smile, and Kurama can't help but smile in return, sinking into the cushioned window seat with his eye. "Would you like any tea?" the boy asks politely, reaching up to pull down cups. "Sure, thanks." Kurama agrees, casting a glance out the window. False dawn hasn't even touched the horizon yet, and there are stars still out, though the moon is hidden behind a ragged swath of clouds. Kurama can't quite wait for the day to come. Yagura has a ship ready to take them to Fire Country's main port, and from there it's an easy day and a half of travel to Konoha. Since technically this visit is because the Mizukage needs to attend the summit, the Freak Squad gets to play escort for him and his guards, and Kurama and his ragtag bunch are more or less tag-alongs. That's fine with Kurama. He doesn't want to cause a stir with Akatsuki still on the loose. "Yeah," Haku says quietly, and Kurama blinks and turns, taking the cup from his hands. The porcelain is warm against the chill of the morning, and he wraps his fingers around it, watching the steam billow and rise from its surface. The cushion shifting makes him look up as Haku takes a seat across from him, perching on the far edge of the window seat and crossing his legs under him, his own cup cradled in his hands. "Something on your mind, Snowflake?" Kurama asks, because while he knows Haku doesn't exactly dislike him, he's gotten the impression that he wasn't high up on the kid's list either. Haku makes the barest suggestion of a face at the nickname, but keeps his eyes on the surface of his tea. "Zabuza was worried about you," he says at last, "while you were gone, and especially when you were late coming back." That's not really what Kurama expected to hear, but somehow it's not all that much of a surprise either. Kurama huffs a little, taking a long sip of tea, and mulls over his responses. There's only one that seems to fit, though. "Yeah, well," he says on a sigh. A movement in the doorway makes him look up with an expression that's halfway between a smirk and a smile. "Piranha Breast doesn't seem like the type to have a lot of friends. And I'm not either. Of course, that would be enough, right?" "No, rare confessions of friendship," you're making me blush, Zabuza says with a chuckle, setting Kubikiribocho aside and dropping backwards into one of the chairs. He folds his arms on the backrest, looking between Kurama and Haku for a second, and then huffs. "This one's mine, you know. Tragic backstory and all. I'm not letting you swipe him, so sticky child snatching figures, do yourself." Haku is turning steadily redder between them, shoulders coming up around his ears, and Kurama has to snort. "Like I want him," he retorts. "I've got enough of my own, and besides, you probably taught him all sorts of bad manners." "Nah, Haku's incorruptible." Zabuza reaches out with one arm, tilting the chair enough that he can slap Haku lightly on the shoulder. "He hasn't poisoned me yet, right? Puff enough?" With a noise that's equal parts mortification and pride, Haku slides out of his seat. "I'll start breakfast," he says and ducks away. Quite the tool. Kurama drawls, watching the way Zabuza's eyes follow in the lack of his usual tension in his face. Zabuza flips him off, but it's clear the gesture is mostly for show. "Gary's never going to change all that much. Still, might be nice if we don't have to be weapons and tools all the time." Kurama could mock, tease, taunt. Instead, he just hums a little, taking another sip of tea. "Yagura said you're one of his guards," he offers, pulling a face. Zabuza makes a sound of clear disgruntlement. "Yeah, and Terumi is the other one. So most like he doesn't trust us not to take over his village or something while he's gone. He's leaving Ao in charge." With a roll of his eyes, he doesn't even try to hide. Kurama draws. "Yeah, imagine that. Leaving a loyal dog here over a rabid fish." "Screw you, firecracker," Zabuza retorts, but there's only amusement in his face. From the doorway, a throat clears. "Am I interrupting something?" Kakashi asks dryly. "Only Fishman's impending death by strangulation," Kurama tells him, watching as Kakashi makes his way into the kitchen. The captain hesitates for a moment, but in the end he takes Haku's abandoned perch on the far edge of the window seat. "Eyeing the man?" Kurama asks. "Up early for a reason." Kakashi's expression shifts into something faintly long-suffering. "Tenzo and Shisui are arguing about whether it's more embarrassing to walk in on someone masturbating or two people having sex," he says, and his tone gets even drier. Itachi went to train on the beach. I thought I'd come to see if everyone was ready. Kurama huffs out a laugh, watching Kakashi with amusement. You know they're going to. Kakashi holds up his hands, fending him off. Stop! Snickering, Kurama settles back a little further in his seat before he can answer, though there's a clatter of footsteps against the wood, and a moment later Naruto skips around the corner. Kurama-ni! He shouts and throws himself headlong at Kurama. Kurama yelps as he very nearly loses his grip on his teacup, only just managing to save it with the very tips of his claws as he catches Naruto with his free arm. Watch it, kid. He huffs even as he drags the boy up onto his lap. Naruto has a shadow, too, still sleepily rubbing his eyes as he tatters over, and Kurama sighs and grabs Gaara by the back of his shirt, hauling him up as well. You two are supposed to be asleep, he tells them, exasperated. We've got a long few days coming up. You left, Kurama-ni! Naruto protests, even as Gaara just tucks himself in tighter to the crook of Kurama's arm and appears to go back to sleep. Well, Kurama supposes he can't fault them after weeks separated. He presses a kiss to wild blonde hair and leans back, letting Naruto sprawl over his chest. Whatever, brat, he says, and pretends not to hear it when Naruto giggles a little, curling up against him and wedging his head under Kurama's chin. Kurama gives Kakashi and Zabuza a look that dares them to say anything. Zabuza just snorts and shakes his head, and Kakashi gives him a look that's clearly amused. Hate you both, Kurama mutters, but it's hard to be all that busy, as he is now. He wiggles his arms up enough to still be able to drink his tea and settles in, watching the sun break through the eastern horizon. It looks like it's going to be a beautiful day.